All right, hello, Mrs. Brown here. I am going through the start of social psychology and looking at a little bit on attribution theory today and some other big concepts from social psychology. So let's get started. The first term that you guys have on here is the person perception. And this is how we form impressions of ourselves and others. So, how we understand ourselves and other people. And this includes attribution theory within this person perception. So, when we say attribution theory, we're looking at this almost like if you've heard of someone's attribute or what do you attribute this to. These are inferences that we draw about the causes of other people's behavior. So why are they acting the way that they are and doing what they do, and how do we explain other people's behavior, and also how do we explain our own behavior? Almost like sometimes do we have excuses for our own behavior or explanations for our own behavior based on our circumstances, or is it more based on our personality traits? So let's give some credit here to Fritz Heider, who came up with attribution theory in 1958. This basically says that we have two different explanations for other people's behavior. One is called a dispositional explanation, and one is called a situational explanation. So, this dispositional explanation is attributing someone's behavior to an internal attribute, something within them, maybe their personality or just how they are. An external or situational attribute is where we explain someone's behavior based on the situation that they're in. And it could be that they're changing the way that they're acting based on the situation. So knowing that we have these two different explanations, there is an error that sometimes we make called the fundamental attribution error, where we might assume that someone's behavior is because of a dispositional explanation, when in reality, it's more of a situational behavior. And if we erroneously do that, then that can lead us to make judgments about someone thinking they're always going to behave that way, when sometimes it is just based on the situation. So let's take a deeper look at this. Again, dispositional attribution is where we explain someone's behavior by crediting stable and enduring traits. They're hardworking, they're positive, they're lazy, they're dumb, they're whatever your constant attribute is. If you use that dispositional attribution, then you're explaining their behavior because that's the way they always act, because that's part of their personality almost. Versus when we look at situational attribution, which is oftentimes a lot more accurate, we explain someone's situation based on, or explain someone's behavior based on the situation, right? They are acting this way because they're in this particular situation. Maybe they're acting more aggressive because they've had a bad day today, not because they are always angry and aggressive as a person. Okay, and we'll talk more about the halo effect in a little bit. Here is a negative behavior, which is like road rage or driving crazy. Some of us have been there in the past where we've maybe driven a little bit more aggressively than we should have. We, when we see someone do this, could say, oh, that person is a crazy driver. They must always drive that way. If we do that, then we are using a dispositional attribution. However, if we say, oh, maybe they're having a bad day, maybe they just got fired, maybe they're sick and they're trying to get to the hospital, or their wife is pregnant, or whatever it is, right? If we're kind of looking at that and giving them the benefit of the doubt of maybe there's something else going on with them that's causing them to drive like that, that's what we consider to be a situational attribution. And so we tend to react more tolerantly when we do have that situational attribution. Sometimes we assume a dispositional attribution when it is a situational explanation. If we do that, then we have committed the FAE, the fundamental attribution error. So I encourage you, when you are trying to understand other people and looking at their behavior, to try to not immediately assume a dispositional attribution. I feel like that is something that I am guilty of as well, where, I kind of make judgments that should be more situationally based. And so I encourage you guys not to commit the fundamental attribution error and to think about situational attributions when explaining behavior. Okay. Here is more on fundamental attribution error. One thing that they use sometimes for examples of this on the AP exam I've seen before is like a homeless person. We might just think, oh, they're a bum. They're just going to use any money they get from begging to buy beer or to buy drugs or, to be up to no good. If we do that, we might commit the fundamental attribution error where we assume that dispositional attribution when it could be that they're situationally homeless, right? Maybe they broke up with a spouse or a boyfriend or girlfriend, or maybe they're just going through a hard time. Maybe they got fired from their job, or maybe they're struggling with mental health issues, right? So there's a lot of reasons why someone might be homeless. And so, we want to be careful not to commit that fundamental attribution error. Okay, good. Some other bias that we see sometimes in explaining behavior, besides the fundamental attribution error, we could have actor-observer bias and self-serving bias. So we're very quick to give ourselves the benefit of the doubt. We are much more likely to assume a situational explanation for ourselves than we are for other people. And so we're kind of wired to perceive ourselves from a more positive lens, which is interesting, than we are to perceive other people in a positive lens. And so the actor-observer bias is the tendency for those acting in a situation to attribute their behavior to external cues. This is another way of saying a situational attribution, but for observers to attribute others' behavior to the dispositional explanation. So, you might say, oh, it's just because of this situation that I'm acting this way. But when you're looking at someone else, you're making a judgment about how they always act. If you do that, that's called actor-observer bias. It is an example of where you might commit the fundamental attribution error. So there's some overlap with these terms. Self-serving bias, again, overlap with these terms. We attribute good deeds and accomplishments of our own to dispositional attributes. So like when we do something good, we're quick to say, oh, that's because I'm so, nice, or I'm so hardworking, I'm so whatever the trait is that you always have. But when you're acting in a way that's maybe not ideal, or you don't have the results that you want, you might blame your mistakes and failures on the situation, right? Like if I get an A on the test, I might say, oh, I'm a really good student. But if I get an F on the test, I might say, oh, well, I missed a lot of school, or, my teacher didn't teach, or, I just can't focus in this class because this girl keeps talking next to me, or whatever it is, right? And so we're quick when it's a problem to think about the situational explanations for why we're not doing well. So that's called that self-serving bias. The false consensus effect, this is another term you should know. This is where individuals overestimate the extent to which their opinions, beliefs, preferences, values, and habits are normal of other people. So we see this a lot with political views. Like we're very quick to think like the way that we think politically is how most people think, and to kind of overestimate how many people would agree with us on that. But anytime you are kind of thinking, oh, everybody thinks this way, or of course this is the way it should be, like, this is normal, and it might not be that way. That is an example of that false consensus where you think like everybody is that way, and it's just not true. So be careful of that. And then we get to understanding what we call explanatory style. We've actually used these terms before, optimistic and pessimistic, as personality traits. But this is where we might have a style where we interpret events either more positively or more negatively. And psychologists think that this can be changed, right? So if we tend to be more optimistic or more pessimistic, sometimes this is because of like who we're around a lot. We might be we have some modeling that's happening of that explanatory style. Maybe your friends are more one way or another. And we can actually begin to analyze our explanatory style and try to consciously work on that and potentially change that. But when we look at things almost, glass half full and explain things in the positive perspective, that's that optimistic explanatory style, versus the pessimistic explanatory style tends to go more negative when looking at a situation, that glass half empty outlook. We've discussed internal and external locus of control before, and we talked about learned helplessness, where you've been conditioned that you can't do anything in a situation, and so you stop trying. That's an example of learned helplessness. What we see is there's a lot of overlap between an external locus of control and that learned helplessness. When we say an external locus of control, we're saying that it's outside forces beyond our personal control that determine our fate and the outcome of things in our lives, right? So like, I can't be successful in this class because it's too hard and all these things keep happening to me, versus the internal locus of control is the perception that we do have control and we can do things that are within our power to control our own fate. So like, this class is hard, and yes, I've had some trouble with it, but I can be working on X, Y, and Z to try to improve. And it's within my power to do well in this class, and I'm going to figure out how to do that, right? And so we see that people who have that internal locus of control, they tend to be more successful and also more satisfied with their lives overall. Okay. When we talk about persuasion in social psychology, I'm sure you guys have heard the term persuasion before. Maybe you've done persuasion types of writing in your English classes, or you've talked about trying to persuade other people. This is us trying to change people's attitudes and influence other people's actions. And so there are some things that we can think about with persuasion. Again, I always tell my psych students, only use your powers for good, never for evil. But we definitely have some things we can think about psychologically with persuasion. So the elaboration likelihood model, this is when we actively process a message. So we mentally elaborate. We've talked about elaboration as a mental process with memory. And so the more that we actively process something, the more we retain it. And according to this, we have two different types of persuasion. We have the central route to persuasion, and we have the peripheral route to persuasion. The central route to persuasion is where we persuade or argue for something using logic, using like the basic facts, the basic argument, and we're just getting to the point and making our argument. However, the peripheral route is where we use what are called incidental cues. These are things other than the actual logical argument that are still playing a factor in convincing someone. So this is like where you have a product, and instead of just talking about why the product is so good, like the central route, you would find a celebrity to endorse the product and hope that people buy the product because they like that celebrity. That's the peripheral route, right? Or like the advertisement looks cool. It looks really cool. You've seen it on social media, and so you buy the product because of that. Or you like the song that's playing in the commercial, or your friend bought it, and so you want to buy it because your friend bought it. So there's all these other incidental cues that can influence why you might want to do something or buy something or be persuaded into something that are outside of just the logical argument itself. And so that peripheral route to persuasion can be very powerful as a persuasion technique. All right. One thing that we see, and here I have the peripheral route to persuasion, and an example of this is, you guys know I love Sabrina Carpenter, and Sabrina Carpenter endorsed this signature drink at Dunkin' Donuts, the brown sugar shaken espresso. And so I definitely bought this drink when it was out. It was a special drink. I think it was out last year in 2025. I don't know if it's still out or not, but I bought it simply because I love Sabrina Carpenter and I really liked her advertisement of this. And so that's an example of that peripheral route to persuasion. I didn't even care whether or not I liked brown sugar or espresso, which I do, thankfully. I thought it was pretty good, but I only bought it because it was Sabrina Carpenter's signature drink. And yes, that's sad for me to admit, but it worked, right? Now, another thing that we see that they will use within these incidental cues is called the halo effect. Think of like how an angel wears a halo and can do no wrong. The halo effect is where we actually think that people who are beautiful, attractive, or popular, or celebrities, or these people that we kind of put on a pedestal, we actually also believe that there's a correlation where they're good people, they're smart people, they're trustworthy people, and we start to think like everything about them is good because they are in this position of, they're a celebrity, or they are more popular, or they are more attractive. And so this is why, especially with celebrity endorsements, they're so powerful at convincing people to be persuaded into buying something or doing something. Even like cartoon characters will see this, where people love that cartoon character, and so they'll buy anything that the cartoon is on, children's cereals, or anything that is, trying to be sold by using this method. We also see this like just with people that we know in everyday life. If we have a teacher that we think, is in a higher status, or for whatever reason, like maybe they're attractive or whatever, we start to think that they're the best teacher, they're the smartest person, that you've met, and they're trustworthy, but you might not actually know those things about them. Or if there's a popular person at school, maybe they're really pretty or popular, and so we start to think like they're good at everything that they do, and they have the best morals, and they're the best person that you've ever met. And so that halo effect can be dangerous because we're making assumptions about someone that we don't actually know. And people who use persuasion, like advertisement companies and people who use persuasion professionally, they know this and they tap into this with trying to sell you their products. This is why like social media influencers make so much money and are so successful, because people like that person, and so they'll buy anything that that person is recommending. Some other persuasion techniques. We have foot in the door and door in the face persuasion techniques, and then reciprocity as well. So again, only use your powers for good and not for evil. Foot in the door, if you've ever heard this phrase like, oh, I just have to get my foot in the door. This is how we get someone to agree to something small, And then because they've already agreed to something small, they're more likely to agree to something after that that is a bigger request. And so this phrase, like, I just have to get my foot in the door, sometimes is used for like jobs where you take a lower position and you hope to then get a higher position after that. But this is like, oh, can I borrow $1? And someone says, yes, of course, you can borrow $1. And they're like, actually, can I borrow $5? Well, because they've already agreed to give you $1, they're actually more likely to agree to the higher amount because psychologically they've already agreed, right? And so this is something that we have to be careful of. Or someone says, oh, can you do me a favor? Can you watch my dog for a day? Oh, sure. Actually, it's going to be 3 days. No problem. You've already agreed to the one day. So what's another couple days? Door in the face is the opposite of this, where you ask something big, they say no, but they feel bad about it. They feel guilty. And because of that, when you ask then for something smaller, they might agree to it. So mom and dad, can I have a car? No, absolutely not. I'm not paying for a car. But they feel bad, they have that guilt. And so then you say, okay, well, I know you can't get me a car, but couldn't I get a cell phone? They might be more likely to agree to that because they've just said no to the larger ask. Can we have an extra week on our assignment? No. Can we have one more day? Maybe, right? So I'm not saying that's going to work on me because I know about all these things because I'm a psych teacher, so don't try it. But this is something that you have to be careful of being used as a persuasion technique against you, but also you can see this in the advertising world as well. When I was 16, I wanted my belly button pierced. That was cool at the time, and I knew my parents were going to say no. And so I asked them for a tattoo intentionally. I didn't want a tattoo at the time, but I knew that they were going to say no. And so when they said no to that, they said, well, can I just get my belly button pierced? And then they said yes. So again, don't do these things that I did and use your powers only for good. But those are some examples of this. Another persuasion technique is called reciprocity. So this is where someone gives you something, and so you kind of feel obligated to do something for them in return. So this reciprocity where you would, I scratch your back, you scratch mine. I every year will get free address labels from different charities. They send you these address labels in the mail, and you're like, wow, this is so nice. They sent me these free address labels, but what they want is for you to mail them back a donation. And so because they've sent you that, they're hoping that you will kind of find it in your heart to return the favor and show that reciprocity. Someone does something nice for you because they want something back. So like you start helping out a lot around the house, you start acting really nice to your parents because you know that you're going to ask them for something, right? And so you're hoping that because you've shown that you've done all this nice stuff for them, that they'll give you something in return. That would be using that reciprocity as a persuasion technique. Okay, some other ones that are not part of our curriculum, but that you might see, the low ball, where we underestimate the time or the cost of something, and then later on it's more. I always think of car salesmen with that one, where it's like they give you the base price of how much your car is going to cost, and then they've lowballed you. And once you're doing all the paperwork, then it's like, oh, you have to pay extra for the tinted windows, and you have to pay extra for the mats, and you have to pay for this and that, and it actually ends up being a lot more than the original cost that they told you. But wait, there's more. There's sometimes that offer of free stuff. If you buy two, then you can get the third one free, right? And so that's another technique that sometimes people will use. Cognitive dissonance theory is basically the idea that sometimes our our thoughts on something or our morals on something and our actions disagree, and this causes dissonance. This causes a feeling of uneasiness, and so we have to resolve that psychological dissonance by either changing our thoughts or changing our actions. And it's a lot easier to change our thoughts than to change our actions in most of these cases. So this is what we usually see, but people don't like to feel like what they're doing and what they believe don't go together. We have, as humans, this uneasy feeling, we call it cognitive dissonance, when our beliefs and our actions are opposite of each other. And so we have to rationalize our behavior sometimes, change our thoughts in order to feel settled with what we've done. An example could be like, if you believe that cheating is bad, but you cheat, right? And so then you're dealing with this guilt and this feeling of cognitive dissonance. And so it's easier to change the thought than to change the behavior. What you should do is like not cheat on your test, right? But if you do, then what you'll do is you'll try to rationalize that. Oh, I have a bad teacher, or oh, I have this situation, or everybody else is doing it, or whatever you tell yourself, so that you rationalize that change in belief to settle that cognitive dissonance and resolve that cognitive dissonance. If you believe that drinking alcohol underage is bad, but you go to a party and you're pressured to drink alcohol underage, then you're going to start rationalizing that behavior in your head. Oh, I had to do it to fit in, or I deserve to have a little fun. All I do is school and I work really hard, or, everybody else, like adults drink and it's not that bad. I just need to do it in moderation. Whatever you tell yourself, clearly what you're doing is illegal, right? So you are trying to resolve your own cognitive dissonance because you don't like that feeling of, I know it's wrong, but I'm doing it anyways. And so that's psychologically what you will do to make yourself feel better. So watch out for that. And then obviously we know that situational factors played a role in some of the major experiments that you guys studied in the assignment that you had. So looking at Zimbardo's Stanford prison experiment, the situation of the prison, quote unquote prison, that impacted how people acted. So we'll talk more about this in a little bit, but basically, like, think about some of these different situational factors in conformity and in obedience and in these major experiments that you've looked at as well. All right, I'm going to wrap up the video here, and I hope you enjoyed.